Can you imagine seeing a 17-year-old completely destroy one of the most feared presenters on American television? On a night that would forever change the history of talk shows, Barron Trump didn't just take on Hamilton Porter, he left him speechless, proving that age is just a number when it comes to intelligence and composure. This extraordinary story will show you how the former president's youngest son turned what was supposed to be another televised massacre into a masterclass in elegance and wisdom. Get ready to discover the most impactful moments of this epic confrontation, where Barron's every response was like a sharp blow to the host's arrogance. Don't miss a second of this video, because by the end, you'll understand how a teenager managed to do what no experienced politician had ever done before. Silence Hamilton Porter using only intelligence and refined humor. And believe me, the lessons you'll learn here could completely change the way you deal with provocations and conflicts. If you want to find out how Barron Trump turned a trap into a historic television moment, keep watching. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on our next amazing stories to come. Wisdom can come from the most unexpected sources, and this is one of them. The studio was buzzing with electricity that night in Los Angeles. The artificial lights created a dramatic shadow play, reflecting off the metal panels and dancing across the modern set in shades of blue and silver. Hamilton Porter, known for destroying his guests' reputations, nervously adjusted his burgundy Italian tie, which contrasted perfectly with his tailored lead grey Italian suit. The audience, a restless mass of more than 300 people, whispered increasingly absurd theories about who the mystery guest might be. In the front rows, cameras captured every movement, every expression of the presenter who from time to time discreetly consulted his note cards, a mischievous smile playing on his lips. The technical team ran around, adjusting microphones and checking camera angles. The director, in his suspended glass booth, gestured frantically to his team, ensuring that every detail was perfect for what promised to be a historic night in American television. Porter mentally rehearsed his sharpest questions, those saved especially for moments of maximum tension. His show was known for turning celebrities into cowering prey, and tonight would be no different. Or so he thought. As he waited, he drummed, his fingers on his tempered glass table, watching the audience through half-closed eyes, getting a foretaste of what was to come. The atmosphere in the studio was one of pure anticipation. The air conditioning blew gently, but it wasn't enough to reduce the heat of anxiety that gripped the room. In the wings, producers were whispering over the radio, coordinating the final preparations for what promised to be the most explosive episode of the season. The moment was cinematic. The studio lights dimmed dramatically, creating a corridor of soft light that led to the main stage. Barron Trump, at an impressive 2.01 meters tall, emerged from the curtains wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that highlighted his athletic figure. His brown hair was impeccably styled, and his youthful face displayed a surprising maturity for his 18 years. The contrast was stark. On one side, veteran presenter Hamilton Porter, known for his sharp tongue and intimidating posture. On the other, a young man who carried the weight of the Trump surname with unexpected elegance. Barron crossed the stage. With firm, measured steps, his hands relaxed at his sides, demonstrating a body control that betrayed years of preparation for moments like this. The audience, which seconds before had been murmuring in anticipation, fell into a deep silence. Some people put their hands to their mouths, others leaned back in their chairs, and there were those who were simply stunned by the imposing presence of the young Trump. The main camera captured the exact moment when Hamilton Porter, always so sure of himself, nervously adjusted his tie and swallowed, his eyes revealing a mixture of surprise and concern. Barron approached the interview area with the same grace that a chess player prepares for a decisive move. His subtle smile, reminiscent of his mother Melania's characteristic smile, conveyed a confidence that seemed to say, "I'm exactly where I should be." When he finally sat down in the guest chair, his calm gaze met Hamilton's, establishing from the first moment that this was going to be no ordinary interview. The game of cat and mouse began with Hamilton Porter adjusting his posture in the black leather chair, crossing his legs and leaning slightly forward. His shrewd eyes sparkled under the studio lights as he twirled his Mont Blanc pen between his fingers, a nervous tick that betrayed his apparent confidence. The rehearsed smile on his face masked the tension that was beginning to build in his shoulders. "So, Barron," he began, his melodious voice echoing through the silent studio, "tell us about your life after the White House. It must have been an interesting transition." The last word carried a subtle tone of provocation, like a dagger wrapped in silk. Barron adjusted himself in his chair, his impeccable posture contrasting with Hamilton's barely disguised unease. With a deep, controlled voice that surprised everyone, he began to answer. His eyes, which had inherited the intensity characteristic of the Trumps, were fixed directly on those of the presenter. "Life after the White House has been exactly what I expected," Barron replied, his words measured and precise like a surgeon. "I have dedicated myself to studies, personal development, and projects that really matter for the future of our country." His answer, although simple, carried a weight that made Hamilton swallow. The presenter, realizing that his apparently harmless questions were not having the desired effect, began drumming his fingers on the armrest. The audience, completely mesmerized, watched the dynamic unfold like a high-level chess match. With each calm response from Barron, Hamilton's confident smile diminished a little more, and drops of sweat began to form on his forehead under the intense studio lights. The young Trump didn't just answer the questions. He took them apart with an elegance that made the veteran host look like an amateur. It was like watching a first-year student give a lesson to an experienced teacher, and the audience was completely absorbed in this unexpected role reversal. Hamilton Porter adjusted his burgundy tie for the third time in less than 5 minutes, his restless fingers showing his growing frustration. The lights in the studio seemed warmer now, causing small drops of sweat to break out on his forehead. He leaned forward in his black leather armchair, his elbows resting on the tempered glass table, assuming his characteristic attack stance. "Barron," he began, his voice carrying a condescending tone that made the audience hold its breath. "Many people question your silence during, shall we say, controversial moments of the Trump administration. Some would say that this silence is a form of complicity." He paused dramatically, savoring each word like a predator preparing to pounce. "What do you have to say about that?" The young Trump discreetly adjusted the cuff of his immaculate white shirt, his blue eyes fixed on the presenter with disconcerting intensity. The audience, mesmerized, watched his every move. Barron uncrossed his legs, leaned forward slightly, and with a deep, controlled voice that echoed through the studio, replied, "Unlike you, Hamilton," he began, pronouncing each word with surgical precision, "I have learned that true wisdom lies not in who speaks the loudest, but in who acts with purpose." His eyes didn't leave the presenter's face for a single second. While some spend their energy looking for controversy, others work quietly to make a difference. The impact was immediate. A murmur of approval ran through the audience while Hamilton, visibly uncomfortable, slumped back in his chair. His hands, which had once gestured confidently, now rested tense on the table. The arrogant smile that usually adorned his face had turned into a tense line, and for the first time in his years on the show, he seemed genuinely speechless. The mood in the studio changed dramatically when Hamilton Porter, adjusting his posture in his chair and leaning forward like a hawk about to pounce on its prey, decided to broach the subject of family. His hands, once relaxed, now gripped the arms of the armchair with visible tension, while drops of sweat began to form on his forehead under the intense studio lights. "Barron," he began, his voice laden with malice, "many criticize your family for creating divisions in American society. How do you deal with being part of one of the most controversial families in modern political history?" The audience collectively held its breath, some even leaning forward in their chairs in anticipation of what could be an explosive moment. Barron, however, remained unperturbed. His blue eyes, which were so reminiscent of his mother's, stared straight into the presenters. With a smooth movement, he adjusted the cuff of his white shirt, and in a clear, controlled voice that echoed through the silent studio, began his response. "You know, Hamilton," he said, his voice carrying a surprising maturity, "it's interesting how some people judge an entire family without ever having sat at our dinner table. Every American family has its own struggles and challenges. The difference is that ours happen under the media spotlight." His response, although polite, carried a weight that made Hamilton visibly slump back in his chair. The presenter, clearly disconcerted by the young man's composure, began drumming his fingers nervously on his glass table. The audience, completely mesmerized, watched the dynamic unfold like a high-level chess match where every move was calculated and precise. With each calm response from Barron, Hamilton's confident smile diminished a little more, and his famous predatory posture began to visibly crumble. The studio looked like a pressure cooker about to explode. Hamilton Porter, visibly uncomfortable, repeatedly adjusted his burgundy tie as drops of sweat trickled down his temple. The studio lights, normally adjusted to favor the presenter, now seemed to expose every tremor on his face. Barron Trump, with impeccable posture in his navy blue suit, leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes fixed on Hamilton with disconcerting intensity. "You talk a lot about credibility and truth, Hamilton," he began, his deep voice echoing through the silent studio. "But let's analyze your own data." With surgical precision, Barron began to pick apart the presenter's contradictions. One by one, he cited specific dates, exact figures, and previous statements Hamilton had made on his show. "In March, you said you cared about the truth above all else," said Barron slowly. "But in your last 50 programs, 127 pieces of inaccurate or completely false information have been identified." The audience, mesmerized by the display of intellectual mastery, watched the scene as if they were witnessing a game of chess where every move was fatal. Hamilton tried to interrupt several times, but Barron, with devastating calm, continued his methodical exposition. "The most interesting thing," Barron continued, adjusting the cuff of his white shirt with elegance, "is that your contradictions are not random. They follow a very specific pattern of narrative manipulation." At this point, some people in the audience put their hands to their mouths. Others began to murmur in shock. Hamilton Porter, the feared host who had made veteran politicians stutter, now found himself huddled in his own chair, his famous sarcastic smile completely gone as the young Trump continued his systematic demolition, turning what should have been a massacre into a masterclass in debate and argumentation. The studio was electrically charged when Hamilton Porter, visibly unsettled and with drops of sweat running down his temple, adjusted his burgundy tie for the 5th time. The studio lights seemed even more intense, creating an almost feverish glow on his face as he prepared for his last desperate attack. "Barron," he began, his voice betraying a slight tremor of frustration. "Many question the kind of education you received, an education that was, shall we say, conservative." He paused dramatically, his fingers drumming nervously on the glass table. How can you guarantee that you haven't simply been indoctrinated into an ideological bubble? The audience collectively held its breath. Some leaned forward in their chairs, others whispered among themselves, anticipating what could be the decisive moment of the evening. The cameras moved closer, capturing every micro-expression of the two protagonists of this verbal clash. Barron Trump, still maintaining his impeccable posture in his navy blue suit, gently adjusted the cuff of his shirt. His blue eyes, which had not left Hamilton for a single second, shone with a calculated intensity. He waited 3 seconds, long enough for the silence in the studio to become almost palpable. "Education," he began, his deep, clear voice, echoing through the silent studio, "is not measured by how much you agree with the dominant narrative, but by your ability to think for yourself." He paused briefly, letting his words penetrate the consciousness of each person present. "And you know what's most interesting, Hamilton? While you're trying to ridicule my background, you're proving exactly the point I'm making: intolerance of different ways of thinking." The impact was instantaneous. The audience erupted into deafening applause, some people even getting up from their seats. Hamilton Porter, for the first time in his career, seemed completely speechless, his expression oscillating between shock and disbelief. His famous, sarcastic smile had completely disappeared, replaced by a barely concealed expression of defeat. The Los Angeles studio was transformed into a volcano of emotions. The intense lights captured the sparkle in the eyes of every spectator, as a wave of deafening applause swept through the room. In the front rows, people stood up spontaneously, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of admiration on their faces. The audience, who had arrived expecting to see Hamilton Porter perform another of his famous public executions, were now witnessing something completely different. The audience of 300 people, normally so aligned with the presenter in his provocations, now completely surrendered to the young Trump. Murmurs of approval echoed among the applause, while cameras captured spontaneous reactions of astonishment and admiration. In the middle rows, a group of executives in suits, who had initially shown skeptical smiles, now exchanged impressed glances. An elderly woman in the third row discreetly dried her eyes with a handkerchief, visibly moved by the young man's maturity and eloquence. Even the cameramen, used to maintaining professional neutrality, couldn't hide their smiles of approval. Hamilton Porter, known for his absolute control on stage, now looked smaller in his black leather chair. His face, normally marked by a sarcastic smile, showed a disconcerting mixture of surprise and discomfort. His hands, which had once gestured confidently, now rested tense on the glass table, while drops of sweat began to form on his forehead. Under the intense studio lights, the program director in his elevated booth gestured frantically to his crew, ordering the cameras to capture every reaction from the audience. The sound technicians quickly adjusted their equipment to capture the growing wave of applause and exclamations of approval that seemed to have no end. In the aisles, producers exchanged astonished glances, aware that they were witnessing a historic moment in American television. The internet went into full boil in the hours following the interview. All the main social media platforms were taken over by an avalanche of shares, comments, and analysis of the historic confrontation between Barron Trump and Hamilton Porter. On Twitter, hashtags such as Barron destroys and Porter humiliated dominated the world's trending topics for more than 48 consecutive hours. The most shared moment, the response about conservative education, went impressively viral, with millions of views in just a few hours. Digital influencers, celebrities, and political commentators from all ideological spectrums couldn't stop discussing the maturity and eloquence shown by the young Trump. On video platforms, amateur editors created dozens of montages highlighting Hamilton Porter's facial expressions as he lost control of the situation, Every raised eyebrow, every bead of sweat, every nervous adjustment of his tie was analyzed and commented on at length. Creative memes comparing the presenter to defeated. Characters from films and series flooded Instagram and TikTok. Facebook discussion groups became veritable arenas of debate, with supporters and critics dissecting every word, every gesture, every nuance of the televised confrontation. Experts in non-verbal communication published long threads analyzing the body language of the two protagonists, highlighting how Barron's serene posture contrasted with Hamilton's growing discomfort. In the comment sections of the main news pages, internet users shared their own experiences of similar situations, turning the clash into a major symbol of the struggle between youth and arrogance, between composure and provocation. The full video of the interview, hosted on the show's official channel, broke viewing records for political content on that platform. On that historic night on American television, we witnessed much more than a simple clash between an experienced presenter and a young Trump. We saw the birth of a new era in communication, where youth and wisdom met in an extraordinary way. Barron Trump didn't just take on Hamilton Porter. He redefined what it means to maintain composure under pressure. With every calculated response, every serene smile, and every precisely chosen word, he demonstrated that true strength lies not in shouting the loudest, but in speaking with purpose and conviction. This story teaches us that even in the most challenging moments, when the cameras are on and millions of eyes are watching us, it is possible to maintain dignity and turn provocations into opportunities to show character. Barron proved that age is just a number when it comes to wisdom and self-control. If you were impressed by this incredible story of how a 17-year-old managed to silence one of the most feared presenters on television, don't miss our next videos. We have many more amazing stories like this to share with you. Click on the subscribe button right now, activate the notification bell, and leave your like so that more people can learn about this extraordinary story. Remember, sometimes the greatest life lessons come from the most unexpected sources.